I appreciate the thoughts that Reese shared just a minute ago with our communion thoughts. I mean, we're talking about flaws. We're talking about being flawed, being imperfect, and I don't know, how much we focus on our flaws and our imperfections. I don't know how many of us actually think that we have some. There may be some of us that may be like, well, I don't really have that many flaws or imperfections. And there may be some others of us who are like, yeah, you do. You want me to list them for you? I knew someone years and years ago that worked in the advertising department, the graphic design part of Neiman Marcus, and actually worked in the they would send out this catalog a few times a year for Neiman Marcus, and she worked in that department, and she was showing me one time just all the different things, and you gotta understand, this is 20-something years ago when she was showing me these things. So I know there's been technological advances since then. But at the time, just in that catalog that they would send out, that they would mail out to different customers and stuff, she showed me the different, photoshopping things, the different things that they used to do to the pictures of these models, modeling Neiman Marcus clothes, to remove imperfections. And there might be, some skin blemishes, maybe some spots or a mole or something like that, or even just, changing the skin tone of a person. They would change a little bit of body shape. They would fix noses. They would touch up eyes. There's all these different things that they would do to make sure that these models looked completely perfect in these seemingly perfect clothes that they were modeling in this catalog. They want to make sure that everything was flawless, that even the tiniest flaws were taken care of so that people wouldn't notice those things. And I'm not knocking it. It was interesting to me how much work and effort went into covering up the tiniest little flaws. But if you think about it, I mean, we all have flaws, don't we? We all have imperfections that we deal with in different areas of our lives. We use makeup to cover up zits or different spots that we don't want seen on our skin. We will turn a vase in our house a certain way to make sure people don't see the cracks in it. We'll paint to cover up rotting wood when we're trying to sell our house. We'll put a picture or a poster over a certain hole in the wall. And if you don't think that's happening in your house, if you got teenagers, I guarantee there's something covering up some kind of mishap, we'll call it that way. There are things in our lives that have mistakes and scuffs and flaws. And there are things about us personally. There are imperfections in our own lives. And it could be a physical body thing. It could be something about our hair or our face or our skin or our body shape or something like that. We have something about ourselves that is imperfect. Some of us have imperfect marriage relationships. Some of us are in imperfect dating relationships right now. Some of us have flaws in the way we've handled our finances, and maybe we've fixed some of those things, or maybe we're just kind of covering up some of those things so that nobody notices how many mistakes we've made with our money. We make mistakes in our friendships. We make mistakes at work. We have flaws when it comes to how we feel about people and how we treat people. And some of us are angry and resentful. And some of us are depressed, but we try to make sure that nobody sees our depression. And we have all these different things about ourselves that we try to cover up, we try to hide, and we try to keep from showing to other people the real me. And maybe we try to hide those things from ourselves, but we try to make sure that other people don't see our flaws and our imperfections. I try to do that because I'm convinced that my flaws or my shortcomings will keep me from measuring up to what I think I should be or to what I think that you think that I should be. And I begin to get worried that somehow you're not going to accept me or you're not going to think that I'm good enough once you see all these things that aren't perfect about me, things that I wish were different, or things that I assume you wish were different about me. And I'm convinced that my past and maybe even my present shortcomings are going to change how you feel about me and how you treat me. And I'm convinced that some of my flaws, my imperfections in my past, or maybe my present, are going to keep me from being all that I think that I should be. I've got mistakes. I've got regrets. I've got habits. I've got things that I don't like about myself. And I'm pretty sure that you do too. At least most of us do. And yet, I work on hiding those things about me or about my family, or I pretend that they're not there. I choose to not be truly genuine with people. Or maybe some of us deal with this. We recognize our own flaws and our own shortcomings, so we spend the bulk of our time pointing out everybody else's. And as long as I can focus everybody's attention on your flaws, as long as I can focus everybody's attention on your mistakes, then you won't pay nearly as much attention to mine. So can we just start out this morning being really honest with each other? I'll go first. I've got a lot of flaws. I've got mistakes that I've made. I've got imperfections about myself. I got things about me that frustrate me. I've got things that I have said and that I've done that I still regret. That some of those things I hope you never find out about. So I'll be the first to say, I've got flaws. I'm far from perfect. There are mistakes that I've made that I still have a hard time getting over. There are people that I've said things to and done things to that I've hurt in different ways that I still regret. And I don't know that I can do anything about all those things. So I'll confess that to you. And I don't need you to call out your flaws and imperfections this morning. I just want maybe even just a show of hands. Don't tell me what they are, but just anybody else imperfect in the room this morning? Okay, I feel a little bit better about myself then. And I want us to start out on the same page and recognize we're all flawed, imperfect people. And even those of us who think that we're not, that may be one of our flaws and imperfections, is not recognizing our own imperfections. And that's what we're going to focus on this morning for the next several weeks is recognizing that we are flawed people and also recognizing there are people in Scripture who are flawed as well. And Reese was right when he said it a minute ago. Like you can sit there and look at different Bible heroes and different Bible characters and think, man, they had their act together. They had all their ducks in a row. They did everything right. God used them in these amazing ways because they never made any mistakes. And we are so wrong when we view Bible characters that way. Because most of them had some kind of imperfection. Most of them had some kind of flaw, maybe multiple ones. And yet God used them in powerful ways in spite of their flaws, in spite of their imperfections. As a matter of fact, sometimes God used those shortcomings to do some pretty amazing things. And if you look through this book, if you take any amount of time looking through this book, you're going to find out that some of our heroes made colossal mistakes. God used murderers and adulterers and liars and cowards. God used the sexually promiscuous and the morally questionable and the socially unacceptable. He trusted in those who didn't always trust in him. He used imperfect people for his perfect plans. And the thing is, he still does. And God has never asked for perfection from his people. He has simply asked imperfect people to be willing to trust him and to follow his lead. That's all our God ever has asked of us. And so we're going to talk about some of these imperfect people over the next few weeks. We're going to talk about one this morning that I think can kind of demonstrate some of the things that we're going to be talking about for the next few weeks. A flawed person that God used in a very powerful way. So if you got your Bibles with you, we'll go through the story very quickly. It's in the book of Joshua. And Joshua is in the Old Testament. And the first 5 books of the Old Testament, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, talk about God's relationship with his people before he brought them into what we call I guess, Israel nowadays, in the area of Canaan, the area around the Jordan River, where he eventually brought them to what he called their promised land. But for 400 years before he brought them there, they had been slaves in Egypt. And then he used a guy named Moses to lead them out of slavery, out of Egypt. And they came out into the wilderness. And God said, I'm going to take care of you. I'm going to protect you. I'm going to bring you into this new land. I'm going to drive out all these other nations that are already living there. I'm going to give it to you. And the people didn't trust that. And the people didn't completely obey God. And God caused them to have to wander around basically in circles in the middle of the wilderness for 40 years. And then he said, now it's time. Now it's time to go into this new land. Now it's time to go into the promised land that I promised to your ancestors and I promised to you. It's time to go in. And Joshua is the guy that replaced Moses. Joshua is now the leader of God's people. And that's the book that comes after Deuteronomy. So you got the first 5 books talking about Israel leading up to going into the promised land. Now Joshua is the one that's going to take him into the promised land. Everybody with me? So before Joshua leads the people into the promised land, he does something kind of significant. It says in Joshua chapter 2, beginning in verse 1. Joshua, son of Nun, secretly sent 2 spies from Shittim and said, go look over the land, especially Jericho. And so they went and entered the house of a prostitute named Rahab, and they stayed there. Now, there's several things to point out in this verse. Again, I'm going to try to do this very quickly. The first city that they're going to come to is at the southern end of the Jordan River. It's a city called Jericho. And back at this time, it was one of the more advanced cities in the area. A lot of wealth in that city. Some different trade routes that were coming in and out of that city, so they had a lot of wealth moving in and out of it. It's also a very fertile area. There's a lot of farming that could be done, so they had a lot of trading that they would do with that, and they could take care of themselves. It was right by a significant water source, and not only that, but archaeologists have found there was an underground spring that was inside the city itself. So if an army ever came and laid siege to the city, they had plenty of food and plenty of water to take care of themselves. They could outlast armies for a significant amount of time. Not only that, but we find out the city of Jericho was a walled city, which was somewhat unusual for cities back in this time. It wasn't completely foreign, but you had to have some wealth and you had to have some technology, you had to have some ability to build these walls. It didn't just have one wall. They've discovered in more recent excavations, there were 2 walls. There was kind of an initial wall that the army would come up against. If they ever figured out how to get that one to come down and get over it, then there was a distance of several yards, and then there was another wall that they had to get over where they, the people inside the city could rain down arrows and rocks and whatever kind of weapons they wanted to use against an army. It was an almost impenetrable city. And Joshua tells his spies, go check out the land, especially go check out that city, Jericho. And it says that he did this secretly. Now, why is he doing that? Well, part of the story that I skipped over earlier was 40 years before this, Joshua was a spy himself for the people of Israel. And he had gone through this land that God was going to send him into. And had seen what an amazing land it was and how it was going to sustain the nation of Israel. It was going to make them into a mighty nation if they took it over and took possession of this land. And he was excited about it. He and his buddy Caleb, they came back and they're telling all the people, man, this is awesome. We need to go in. God's going to give us this amazing land. But there were 12 of those spies all together, and he and his buddy Caleb were the ones that said, God can lead us and help us to do this. The other 10 guys said, there's no way in this world. They're right. It's an amazing land. But no, they're wrong. There's no way we can take over this land. These people are going to annihilate us. They're going to destroy us. There's no way that we can get into this land that God has given us. And because of that, God punished the people and made them wander around for 40 years. So it's been 40 years since Joshua has even seen the land. So there's part of the reason for sending the spies, like, go see what it looks like now. A lot can change in 40 years' time. But it also says that he sent them, what? Secretly. Why? Well, part of the spy's job is to do things in secret, right? But I don't think that it's just about them being secretive in their mission into Jericho. He didn't tell the rest of the people about it. Because the last time that the people knew that there were spies that went into this promised land, what happened? They all said, we can't do it. They all joined in with the rest of the spies, said there's no way that we can take over this land. So Joshua's not going to run the risk of that again. He's sending 2 guys, and he's not telling anybody else about it. And they get to Jericho, and they I'm guessing, walk around the city trying to see if there's any weaknesses in the defenses. They're walking the area around. And the scripture says they came and stayed at the house of a prostitute named Rahab. And why they chose to stay there, we don't know for sure. I mean, we can't rule out the possibility that they wanted to go spend time with a prostitute. That's a possibility. Some other things that would be a benefit, probably. Prostitutes would live in a certain part of town where not everybody, especially the royalty and the elite in town, would come visit. And so they might be kind of back in a part of town where nobody would see them and pay that much attention to them. She would also have an awareness of what's going on in town. She would hear about things from other customers. People are probably less likely to question who's coming in and out of her house. There's all sorts of different people that would be coming into her home. So they're not going to question these guys coming in and out. So it was actually very useful for them to stay there. But eventually word gets to the king of Jericho. If you keep reading through chapter 2, he sends word to Rahab and says, I know there's 2 guys there. You need to send them to me because I know that they've been sent to spy out the land. And the guys who come to capture these spies come to Rahab's house and look for them. And she says they're not here. They were here, but they're not here anymore. And what she had actually done was taken them up on the roof of her home and hidden them under stacks of flax. This plant that they would use to make linens out of. And she had hidden them under all of that. And when it was eventually safe, she made a deal with them. I know you guys are coming. I know your God is more powerful than our gods. I know God is going to give you this land. When you guys come and destroy the city, it wasn't an if, it's when you do, make sure to take care of me and my family because I took care of you. And that's what they do. The spies come back and they report everything to Joshua. And if you read through the rest of the story, we won't take the time to get into it today. But this is the story where the Israelites walk laps around the city of Jericho and then God causes the walls to fall down and they all run in and take over the city. Rahab and her family is spared because of what she did for these spies. And there's a lot of different things that we could get out of this story, but I specifically want to look at Rahab this morning. Because we're talking about an individual with some flaws in their character. Rahab would definitely be on the list. Would you agree? Rahab would absolutely be on the list. And yet God used Rahab, the prostitute, to fulfill his purpose. I mean, God is looking at the situation. He's like, I need to protect my people. I need to protect these 2 spies, and I need to jumpstart this plan for me to bring my people into this promised land. Who am I going to use? I know. I'll use the local prostitute. And probably most of us would not think of that. Most of us would not use a person like that to fulfill our purposes. But that's exactly what God did. And there's 2 things that I want us to see in Rahab's story this morning that I think we need to make a part of our own story, that we need to implement in our own lives. That when we recognize that God is calling us to live a certain way, when we recognize God's leading and God's plans and God's purposes in our lives, and we're hesitant to follow his lead, we're thinking that maybe we can't measure up, we can't be the people that God is calling us to be, or do the things that we feel like his Spirit is leading us to do. That in those moments when those times come, there's some things we can see in Rahab's story that can help empower us to do what God is calling us to do. Actually, some things that we need to keep from doing so that God can use us in these powerful ways. And the first thing that we see in Rahab that I need to implement in my own life is that I don't need to let my past define me. I don't need to let my past define me, my choices or my upbringing or my past failures. I don't need to allow those things to label me and to define what kind of person I am, because it's really easy for me to do that. It's easy for me to look at my mistakes or to look at my past circumstances that maybe I had no control over, and to view myself through that lens and say, well, this is just the person that I am. This is all that I can be. I mean, Rahab had been, at least at this point, a prostitute. And who knows how she got into the business in the first place. Maybe it was a lucrative business and she enjoyed having random sex with a lot of people. Maybe so. Maybe she grew up in an abusive home and never knew what it was like to have healthy relationships. Maybe something had happened where she had been sold into this profession, something that she had no control over. Maybe something had happened in her past where this is where she ended up. And now she's feeling broken and empty and having no connections with people. And to be honest, when she is presented with an opportunity to do something good, to help, to serve, to do something positive with her circumstances, to allow God to use her in this powerful way, her past could have led her to let the opportunity slip by. It would have been completely natural, completely understandable for Rahab to be like, no, I'm not, like, this isn't for me. Somebody else needs to help these guys, not me. Somebody else needs to come to the rescue. Somebody else needs to do something for God's purposes and God's plans, not me. I'm just a prostitute. And that's all I've ever been. And my past is the sum total of me. But she didn't do that. She didn't let her past define her. And I don't need to allow my past to define me either. I don't need to let my past be the lens that I view myself through or allow other people to view me through. I am not a sum total of my mistakes. I'm not a compilation of my shortcomings. I may have failed in the past, but I am not a failure. One of the beautiful ways that we see this described about God using us in spite of our past is in 1 Corinthians chapter 6. And in 1 Corinthians in the New Testament, chapter 6, as Paul goes through his whole list of different sins and different shortcomings, different things that Christian people, church people were doing before they came to Christ, before they had a relationship with him. And Paul lists off all these different ones. It's not an exhaustive list. It's just a lot of different things that he says, if you continue in this lifestyle, you're not going to be a child of God, and you're not going to get to receive all the blessings of being a child of God. And after he closes that list in 1 Corinthians chapter 6 and verse 11, he says this, that is what some of you were. And if you got your Bibles, I would underline that sentence. I would put stars around it. I would draw a box around it, whatever. I would come back to that sentence often. Because Paul can say the same thing to us. When looking at my mistakes, when looking at my shortcomings, when looking at all the things that I've done in the past I'm not proud of, Paul would look at me and say, that is what you were, not what you are. You were washed, you were sanctified, you were justified in the name of the Lord Jesus Christ and by the Spirit of our God. You made these mistakes in the past. That's who you were. That's not who you are now. And we could add to the list now. Paul could say, you were an addict. You were a person who cheated on your spouse. You were a person who was only focused on your career. You were lazy. You were self-centered. Fill in the blank. These are the things that I was. I used to be this person. That is what you were. That is who you have been. That's not who you are. Why? Because my past doesn't define me. My God does. And I'm not a compilation of my mistakes. I am a saved, blood-covered, forgiven child of God. And that's what defines me now. Not my past, not my flaws. So I don't need to let my flaws and my past define me, but I also don't need to let my flaws restrain me. And maybe it's a sin, maybe it's an addiction of some kind. Maybe it's a personality trait, maybe it's fear, maybe it's ways that people have hurt me in the past. Whatever the flaw, whatever the imperfection is, I don't need to let that keep me from doing something that God is leading me to do. Keep me from being someone that God is shaping me to be. God sent these spies into Jericho so they could use their report to encourage Joshua to carry on this mission, to encourage his people to start moving forward. That was the job of the spies. But God used Rahab to protect them so that they could fulfill God's purposes. He used her house. He used her flax. He used her profession to fulfill his plan and save his people. And again, she could have very easily allowed not just her past, but her present, the imperfections she was still dealing with to keep her from being a part of that process, but she didn't do that. The flaws in Rahab's character didn't just magically go away. They were still there, but those things didn't keep her from doing what God was calling her to do. And again, we see this in several different people. We talked about this in a guy named Peter a few weeks ago. And some of y'all will remember that. We talked about Jesus' disciple, Peter. And how Peter, before Jesus was arrested, before he went to the cross, Peter was saying, I will never leave you. I will never forsake you. I'll always be there for you. I'll stick up for you no matter what. And a few hours later, after making that bold claim, Peter is saying, I don't even know who the guy is. I don't even know who this Jesus person is. You talk about colossal failure. You talk about glaring flaw and imperfection. And when Jesus meets up with Peter again after the cross, after the resurrection, when he's having a conversation with Peter again in John chapter 21, if you go and look in that conversation they had with Peter, there's 3 different times that he tells Peter, Peter, I need you to feed my sheep. Feed my lambs. Take care of my sheep. I'm not done with you yet. Yeah, you made a mistake, but I'm not done with you yet. And he goes on even from there, and he says in John chapter 21, verse 19, he says to Peter, follow me. And it would be natural, it would be understandable for us if we were in Jesus' shoes to go, Peter, you messed up. You said you would never leave, and you did. And I can't trust that you won't do that again. So you know what? We're done. But that's not what he did, was it? The past wasn't gone. The flaws are still there. Peter's imperfections didn't magically go away. Jesus just looked at him and said, I know there's imperfections. I know there's flaws. Come follow me anyway. I don't need to let my flaws restrain me from doing in this moment whatever it is that God is calling me to do. God still has plans for me. God still wants to use me. God can still use me to bless other people. And I just need to keep from letting my past mistakes and my current challenges from causing me to walk away from Him, walk away from who it is that He's calling me to be. Rahab had some serious flaws. At least one glaring one. She's a prostitute. And yet God used her in a powerful way because she didn't let her past define her and she didn't let her flaws restrain her. And as we continue to look through these stories that we're going to look through over the next several weeks, we're going to see those 2 principles come back over and over and over again. And I want to start out this series, I want to start out this morning challenging you with that. To not allow your flaws, your past, the shortcomings, the mistakes of the past to be your label, to be the lens that you view yourself through. And also to not let mistakes and shortcomings and failures of the past cause you to not try again. And cause you to not allow God to use you in amazing ways. So I hope you keep coming and being a part of this series. And I hope you bring other people along with you. Because we're going to find out that most of God's followers, including us, have a laundry list of imperfections. And God has never called us to be perfect. God is perfect Himself and perfectly able to use us in spite of our imperfections. I'll end with this. I told you this morning as we were talking about Memorial Day, that is a part of that trip that my family went on. We went to the Museum of the American Revolution. That's the official title. There's all these displays and all these different things just kind of leading you through the story of the Revolutionary War. And towards the end of the Revolutionary War, there was a specific battle that took place in the Carolinas called the Battle of the Cowpens. And if you've ever seen the movie The Patriot with Mel Gibson, the final battle scene in that movie is loosely based on the actual battle. And there was a guy that was one of the generals for the American troops. And he went around and talked to the militiamen. Now, the militia was different than your regular soldiers. These were farmers and merchantmen and people that honestly just happened to have guns that said, yeah, we'll go out and fight. They didn't have a whole lot of military training. And their tendency, the militia's tendency, was when the battle started getting kind of heated, when shots started being fired, their tendency was to drop their guns and run away. And it happened over and over and over again. And the Americans, throughout the Revolutionary War, continued to suffer losses or even lose battles because of militia that ran away. And there's one particular general, his name was Daniel Morgan. And he was going to be in charge of this battle of the Cowpens. And he went around campfire to campfire, campfire to campfire, tent to tent, throughout the whole camp the night before the battle, specifically to the guys that were in the militia. And he said, I just need you to fire 2 shots. Just give me 2 shots and you're done. And his whole plan was if they would stay there long enough to fire 2 shots, they could retreat. And what he and the other leadership had done was put the regular army back behind a hillside where the British soldiers couldn't see them. And if they would just stand there and fire those 2 shots and then run away, the British soldiers would think, oh, they're retreating again. And they would come forward to annihilate them, to finish the job. And then they would run smack into the American soldiers, which is what happened. And the American army won a huge battle, fairly decisive battle. It's a turning point in the southern part of the war. It wasn't too long after that the British surrendered at Yorktown. And I share that story with you as we wrap up this morning because I want you to see the militia, the American militia, at least that particular group of militiamen, had a huge flaw. They ran. When things got bad, they ran away. That's a big shortcoming. But instead of barking at him and go, what is your problem? Why do you keep falling short? Why do you keep running away? Why do you keep getting scared? Why do you keep letting us down? Instead of beating them over the head with that message, here's what Daniel Morgan did. He said, just 2 shots is all I need. I know it's going to be hard. I know it's going to be tough. I just need 2 shots from you, and you can fall back. And I share that with you because I feel like all of us have imperfections, flaws, shortcomings, failures. And there are multiple times where we beat ourselves up and say, why can't I do better? Why can't I move forward? Why do I keep messing up? I might as well not even try because I'm just going to fall again. And we have a God who's not asking for perfection from us. And who's not asking for us to do the impossible. My God says, stick with me. Let's make good choices today. Let's be patient. Let's hold our temper. Let's control our tongue today. And we'll try again tomorrow. And the day after that. And I can still use you no matter what. I can still use you to do amazing things. I don't need the impossible from you. I need you to trust me. And take a step forward. Yeah, there's flaws. Yeah, there's imperfections. But I'm not done with you yet. So let's wrap up this morning. Here in a second, we're going to stand together as we do every Sunday. We're going to stand together and we're going to sing a song. And as we're singing that song, if you're standing there this morning going, man, I've got so many flaws and imperfections and things that I'm embarrassed of and things that I'm hurt by and things that I've done to hurt others. This is an opportunity to be honest about that with yourself. And if you need to, be honest with this church family. And you're welcome to come to the front and say, as we're singing this song, I've got failures. I've got shortcomings. I've got flaws. And I've let myself be defined by those for too long. And I don't want to focus on those anymore. I want to be washed clean of them. And I want God to use me in ways I've never been used before. Because he can. And you will be surrounded, not by judgment, not by criticism. You will be surrounded by loving people who are completely flawed and imperfect themselves. And we will love you and we will do whatever we can to help you. Because that's what we're here for. That's what God has called us to do. So if we can help you let go of your past, if we can help you get rid of the shackles that are restraining you from being all that God could make you to be, then please come forward and let us know about that so that we can help. While together we stand and sing.